How much money do I make? How much money do you make? How much money do you actually make? How much money does Alex Hermosi make? How much money does Andrew Tate make? Whoa! How much money does Alex Jones make? How much money does your favorite sexy Instagram model with the 4 million followers? How much money does she make? Today we're going to talk about what income really means and how it's a little more complicated than you might think. It's not often what you think it is. So insert your favorite celebrity or content creator on the internet in terms of how much money you think that person makes. And what you think that person makes, that person probably doesn't make. In most cases, that person probably doesn't make what you think they make in terms of they probably make less. But in many cases, sometimes they may make more than what you think they make. Interesting. Let's discuss this. As you may know, if you know my content, I have always kept my income ambiguous. Whenever I quote things like 7 figures, 6 figures, high 6 figures, I kind of bounce around those numbers. I purposely keep it ambiguous. I've done that my whole life. I've done that for several reasons. I have written it in my blogs and also talked about it on my YouTube channel as well about why I do that. There are several reasons. There are two big ones. The first reason, although the smaller of the two reasons, is that it's just not a good idea in a left-wing society like the United States, in an era where Western governments are collapsing all over the place. It's not a great idea to go around bragging about how much money you make using specific numbers in public. Just not a great idea. You could do that in the 80s. In the early 90s, you could brag and show people how much money you're making. People say, ooh, awesome, and you were perfectly safe. Today, just not a great idea. However, the second reason, and the bigger of the two reasons, is that you kill something called relatability. If I start throwing around how much money I make in a typical month or in a typical launch or in a typical year, how much I gross or net or things like that, a percentage of the audience will go, well, I could never do that. I guess I can never be like Caleb and never do anything Caleb does. Oh, well, and then you lose credibility and you lose the ability to actually help your audience. And the reason I know this for a fact is I've seen other content creators go through this over the years. My favorite example, although I could give you several names, is Pat Flynn. If those of you know who he is, he's a business podcaster. He seems like a very nice guy. For many, many years at his blogs, Pat Flynn gave income reports, and he would literally show his profit and loss statement every month about how much he would gross, his expenses, how much money he would make. And for a while, his audience loved it and thought it was great when he was making, $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month. People thought it was great. But when he started getting up to like $50,000 a month, $70,000 a month, $150,000 a month, he noticed a bunch of his audience started to tune out. And they started saying, well, he makes all this money. I could never do that. So he stopped doing it because he realized he was hurting his ability to help his audience because he got into a zone where people just either couldn't relate or in many cases didn't believe it. So there's lots of reasons why I don't talk about my specific income, but I'm going to give you 4 reasons why how much money you think people make on the internet or people in business or maybe people you know aren't making what you actually think they're making. Like I said, they may be making a lot less money than you think. That's usually the case. But sometimes they might be making actually a lot more than what you think. I'll give you 4 reasons. Reason number 1, and by the way, if you're a seasoned business owner, you are already aware probably of all 4 of these reasons. But most of you aren't seasoned business owners or you're new business owners, so you have a small business, so you may be a little new to these things. So reason number 1, top of the list, is that you have net versus gross. Okay? So, and I've mentioned this before, there are a lot of guys out there who say, I make $1 million. I make $1 million a year. They don't make $1 million. What they have is a business, often that they have with a partner, which they got to share 50% of the profit with. But even if they don't, they have a business that grosses $1 million in gross revenue, what we call top line. So $1 million goes into the business, but then you have this thing called business expenses. And you have to pay people, and you have to pay expenses, you have to pay product and fulfillment costs and customer service costs and overhead and sometimes inventory, and you have a staff and you have marketing costs, right? You have all these costs, commissions and ad fees, and right? You have all these costs. Then all these costs come out, and then that little tiny number at the bottom, that's what the guy actually makes. It's a lot less than $1 million, but he conveniently doesn't tell you that part. Instead, he just says, I'm a 7-figure earner. I make $1 million. I make $3 million a year. I have personally seen people do this, not only on the internet, but in public, in real life scenarios. Oh yeah, I made $3 million last year. And I know for a fact, because I talked to the guy, went through his numbers, you didn't make 3 million, bro. You didn't even make $1 million. You grossed 3 million. You didn't make 3 million. So be aware of this. When people throw around these big numbers, often they're talking about gross, not net. And what all that matters really is gross. However, sometimes gross does matter more than net. What? And that brings me to item number 2. And this gets a little weird. And again, if you're not a seasoned business owner, you may not be aware of this concept. I'm gonna give you a scenario. Let's say you have a business, okay? And your profit after expenses, before taxes, but after expenses, your profit is $2 million in a given year. That's your actual profit, real money in the bank, $2 million. And let's say you're one of these guys who you want to, you don't need to buy a Lamborghini. You could live in a small little house. You're like Bill Gates back then. You don't want a lot of stuff. You just want to build a big corporation someday. So let's say you take that $2 million, you take $100,000 as income, you put the other $1.9 million back into the business. You reinvest it back into the company because you want to grow that business. You don't want the money. You want the business to have the money. So at the end of the year, you made $100,000. But did you? See, in my world, you made $2 million. You're a $2 million earner. You just chose to take that $2 million cash and put it back into your company. So even though in your profit and loss and your tax return, it says you made $100,000 as a salary or distributions, whatever you did, you actually made $2 million. No one knows you made that, but you did. So that's how you have scenarios where sometimes you have business owners who say, oh yeah, I made $100,000 last year, or I get a salary of $100,000, or I made $50,000, or I made $250,000. They're actually making a lot more than that. They're just choosing to redirect their money back in their company. Now you could make the argument, well, Caleb, if they do that, then they didn't make that money. They did make $100,000. Yeah, it's a gray area. Technically, you're right. They made $100,000 on paper. That's true. But they created cash, $2 million or $1 million that they chose to reinvest. So in my world, you actually made a lot more than that 100,000. Make sense? That's number 2. Number 3, and if you're a business owner, you know all about this one. What you do in your business is that you run expenses through your business that you might normally run in your personal life, but you run them through your business for tax purposes. So very often you'll have a guy at the end of the year, a guy with a small company, and it'll be a profitable year, and the guy will get a frantic phone call from his accountant around November or December. This happens all the time in the small business world. And the accountant says, hey man, you're going to make a lot of money this year. You need to go buy something in the business. Go buy a new computer system. Go buy a new truck. I knew a guy who had a service where he installed fancy lighting systems in commercial properties. And so his accountant said, hey man, do you need like a new truck or something? The guy's like, yeah, I could get a new truck. He's like, you might want to buy a new truck because you're going to incur a lot of tax expense because of all the profit you made this year. So this guy said, cool. So he went out and bought a big, expensive, cool new truck for the company. And it was legally for the company. And that way he made less money at the end of the year, taxable income, but he actually made the money as profit to buy the cool new truck that he didn't actually need, but he bought just to avoid taxes. So when you have your own business, your real income is your income as cash plus the business expenses, and in the business world we call it wink wink income, the business expenses, wink wink, that you ran through the business that you didn't show as income, but you didn't have to buy those things, but you could legally write them off. Guys buy cars, guys buy trucks, guys buy fancy laptops, guys buy fancy TV and electronic equipment, guys buy boats, right? All kinds of stuff that they can legally, this is not illegal, 100% legally run through their business as full business expenses, and they made the money to buy those things. So that means they actually made more money than is what's showing up on their tax return. Often people like me, when they go to get a loan or a mortgage, and the bank says, show me your tax return, the business owner goes, yeah, I can show you my tax return, but that's not what I make, bro, wink, wink. I make a lot fucking more than that. And you know why, wink, wink. And the banks know, yes, wink, wink, you make more than that. So sometimes you have to show like checking account statements and things like that. So that's another scenario where they may be making more than you might think they might be making. Now, fourth scenario, and this is less often, but this does happen, is that sometimes business owners purposely leave cash in a company and they roll it over to the next year for whatever reason. Sometimes there's tax reasons to do this. For example, if you own a C Corp versus an S Corp, you say you might defer taxes by rolling cash into the next year. So if you have $100,000 cash on December 30th, and you don't want that as income, you don't want to pay the corporate tax of that, you just leave it in the coffers of the business, you wait till January, then you take the money out, or February or March. You don't show that as income for the year, but you still made the money. Make sense? So there's other examples besides these, but those are just 4 examples of why you really can't trust or assume anything when you hear someone say, I make blank, or someone shows you a tax return, or some hater says, show me your tax return, your pay stub, some guy shows it, but it doesn't really mean what it actually means. So this is why income is a little more complex than you might think. So next time you hear someone say, I make blank, it's not that simple. He might make that amount, or she might make that amount, but in most cases, that person is making a lot less, or in some cases, a lot more. Food for thought. Think about this, and also consider these things as you make more money, which of course is the entire objective here. Wink, wink.